Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the world of rural India. And look, you really can't understand India as a whole without getting a handle on its villages.
Wow, just take a second to look at that number. Over 741 million people. That's from the 2001 census. We're talking about a time when nearly 3/4 of all Indians lived in villages. And this isn't some dry historical fact. It's the bedrock identity of the nation. To get where India's going, you absolutely have to understand where it comes from.
But what does rural India even mean? It sounds simple, right? But the answer is, well, it's anything but. See, rural India isn't just a place. It's this incredibly complex web of society, money, and tradition that's been woven together for centuries. So here's our game plan. First, we'll figure out what a village even is. Then we'll get into the social fabric, the economic engine, tackle the tough issue of poverty, and wrap up by looking at what's next. All right, first things first. Let's talk about the setting itself, the Indian village. What actually makes a village, well, a village?
So you'd probably think it's about how many people live there or how big it is, right? Nope. Officially, it's not about that at all. A village in India is actually an administrative thing. They call it a revenue village. It was basically drawn on a map to make collecting land taxes easier. So it could be one big settlement, or it could be a whole bunch of tiny, separate hamlets all grouped under one name.
And here's a cool way to think about it. Sociologists say don't think of rural and urban as black and white opposites. It's more like a spectrum, a continuum. On one far end, you've got your ideal traditional village. On the other, the super modern, forward-looking city. And of course, pretty much every real place in the world lives somewhere in the middle, mixing and matching bits from both sides. And this is so important to get. There's no such thing as the Indian village. It just doesn't exist. The reality is this incredible spectrum. You've got super wealthy villages in Punjab, thanks to money sent from abroad, and then you have extremely poor villages in places like Bihar. You've got villages on the edge of cities that are basically becoming suburbs, and tiny tribal hamlets. The variety is just massive, and you have to appreciate that to get the whole picture. Okay, so now that we have the lay of the land, let's zoom in a bit. Let's talk about the social fabric, the unwritten rules of life built on caste, family, and duty. So traditionally, the absolute core of the village social structure is jati, or caste. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Imagine being born into a guild that has a total monopoly on a specific job. If you were born into the Potter caste, your family were the Potters. That's it. It was your job, it was hereditary, and it was exclusive. And this setup creates a really interesting push and pull, a kind of dual identity. You have vertical solidarity, which is the glue holding a single village together. The landowners need the blacksmith needs the potter, everyone depends on each other. But then you have horizontal solidarity, which connects you to everyone else in your same caste, no matter what village they live in. This becomes a huge network for everything from arranging marriages to political power. And the economic system that made all this work, the glue for that vertical solidarity, was called the Jajmani system. Now, forget about cash. This wasn't about paying wages. It was a whole web of duties and obligations passed down through generations. You had the patrons, the landowners called Jajmans, and the families who provided services, the commons. So here's how it worked in a nutshell. A Kamarn family, say the carpenter, would do work for a Jajman family all year long. Then, when the harvest came in, they wouldn't get a paycheck. They'd get a pre-agreed share of the grain. The whole point was stability and long-term relationships, not making a quick buck.
All right, so if caste is one pillar of the village, the family is the other. And the ideal, especially for families that owned land, was the joint family. We're talking multiple generations, grandparents, parents, uncles, kids, all living under one roof, or at least sharing a kitchen, sharing all their property, and making decisions together. The family unit, the collective, was way more important than any one person's ambitions.
So you see, the family structure itself is often tied directly to economics. That joint family model works really well when you have a big asset, like a farm that you need to manage together. But if you're landless or you have to move around for work, it's just not practical.
For those families, the smaller, more mobile nuclear family has always made more sense. Okay, let's shift gears now. We've talked about the social rules, so let's get into the economic engine that drives everything. And that is, of course, agriculture. Just take a look at this chart from the late 90s. It tells you pretty much everything you need to know about traditional agriculture. It was all about survival. I mean, look at that. A whopping 2/3 of all the farmland was used for growing food grains like rice and wheat. That's what fed the family, the village, and the whole country. Now, farming in modern India hasn't just been a steady upward climb. It's happened in these clear, distinct phases. In the beginning, after independence, growth was just about putting more land under the plow. Then, bam, the Green Revolution hits in the 60s, and suddenly technology starts boosting yields like crazy. That success spread out more in the 80s, but then things kind of slowed down in the 90s when big economic reforms changed the government's role. And this leads us to a massive, ongoing challenge in Indian agriculture: how the land is divided up, or how it's not divided up. Look at these numbers from the early 90s. They're staggering. You have 78% of farmers, the little guys, squeezed onto just 33% of the land. It's a huge imbalance. So, what happens when you take those rigid social structures we talked about and you pile on the economic reality of land inequality and the unpredictability of farming? You get the biggest, most persistent challenge of all for rural India: poverty. And it's important to understand what poverty means in the official Indian sense. It's not about not having a TV. It's a line drawn at absolute bare-bones survival. It's literally calculated based on the amount of money you need to buy enough food to get a certain number of calories every day, 2,400 for rural areas. We are talking right at the edge of subsistence. Now, there is some good news here. The trend has been going in the right direction. As you can see, the percentage of people in rural poverty dropped by more than half between the 70s and the turn of the century. That's a huge achievement. But here's the catch. Because the population was also growing so fast, the total number of people living in poverty was still just enormous. So all of this, the history, the society, the economics, it all leads to one massive question. What's next? What does the future hold for India's villages? You know, a quote from Indira Gandhi that's in our source material really points to one possible answer. She called education a liberating force, a democratizing force, cutting across the barriers of caste and class. It's this powerful idea that education could be the very thing that helps break down those old structures we've been talking about. And that's really the final thought we want to leave you with. India is urbanizing and changing at a dizzying speed. So what happens to the villages? Are they just going to be left behind like relics in a museum? Or could they actually be the seedbed for something new? A totally reimagined kind of Indian society? The question is still wide open.